All right, see you guys. No. It's a bad joke. Kids, oh yeah. Or just a reminder, Paul said it before the prayer, but just in case you missed it, it's children's church, so if you are planning to go to children's church, this is the time to head out there. And if you're not, that's cool too. Something that Paul said before the prayer was that we have the freedom, maybe it was during the prayer, it kind of goes together for me. We have the freedom to not have to worship in hiding. But think about it though, like how many of us are like out intentionally having conversations with people or intentionally calling out the good in people, the spirit that we see in people, calling that out throughout the rest of the week. Like, it's easy to do it in here, and how many of us are facing the challenge of doing that throughout the rest of the week? Something to think about, something to challenge ourselves with. I wanted to start, sometimes, this isn't the reason I smile a lot, but sometimes I smile when I'm uncomfortable. Anybody else in here do that? He's like, I don't know how to react, so I'm just going to smile. Like, I'm mad, but I don't know how to. It's not nice to be mad, so I'll just smile instead. But, so humor is something that you can use, and I found I can use to bring smiles out of people for the sake of a smile, not for the sake of discomfort. So I hope that this doesn't make anybody uncomfortable, but memes have swept the internet, okay? If you spend any time on social media, you see memes. This is one of the first images of memes when memes started, taking off. This is called the Velociraptor. And the Velociraptor says wise things to get you thinking. And the question the Velociraptor is asking is, if language was a punishment for building the Tower of Babel, does that mean learning a new language is a sin? I don't imagine there are any here, but there might be some people here like, yes, exactly. That's why I haven't learned those languages. And yet, here in a few months, I'll be learning or I guess not really learning because I kind of know Greek, but I'll be relearning some more languages for the sake of studying the Bible better, which would be mildly ironic if it were a sin. So I don't believe it's a sin. Enough jokes. I thought of another one, but I'm not. David Futcher wants to hear. Okay, so what do you call somebody who can speak 3 languages? No, it's not like a joke answer. It's like trilingual, right? And what's the name of somebody called who speaks 2 languages? And what about one language? I was told it's American, but I don't know. All right, that's the last joke. I see some people headed for the doors. Humor is something that I believe God has given us as a gift, and so I hope that that nobody is offended, but if you are, this is the reason I try to start with some humor is because I believe laughter comes from the Father, and I believe if we're spending time in laughter, that's a healthy thing. Laughter is the best medicine, and that's something I'm convinced of. So anyway, just a little bit of morning laughter for us. Let's have a quick word of prayer, and then we'll get started here exploring altars. God, we love you so much. You've given so many gifts to us, and sometimes we try to hoard them to ourselves. We try to keep them to ourselves, or we try to build them up even greater, but you are the source of our gifts. Continue to be gracious to us when we withhold sacrifices from you, when you ask us to lay them on the altar. Open our eyes to see the gifts, our hearts to value and appreciate them, and also to share them with others. We love you. Amen. I would like to spend some time this morning talking about the Tower of Babel, which is why we started with that joke of learning languages. The Tower of Babel, that story is found in Genesis chapter 11, which, if you've got the app, that works. If you've got the Bible in front of you, or if you're in the front row, maybe behind you. But Genesis 11, we're just going to read through this, and then we're kind of going to jump around a little bit and piece it together a little bit more. And I'm hoping that we can draw out some new observations from this. And if you already know all the stuff that is shared today, then that's awesome. Share it with others. Chapter 11 of Genesis, verse 1. I'm going to read through verse 9, so I'm going to read a good chunk here. I'm reading from the English Standard Version in case you're recognizing that the words aren't quite matching up with yours. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." Verse 5, "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, 'Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them.'" Verse 7, "Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel, or Babel, or Babel. There are many pronunciations, and I don't know which one is best. Because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. I think it's an interesting turn of events that the reason they built this was just in case they got dispersed over all of the earth, and that's exactly what happens. How many of you trying to avoid something from happening, complete that task, and what you were afraid would happen still happens? I want to jump back to Genesis chapter 8, verses 17 through 20. The floodwaters have subsided. The ark has rested on the top of the mountain, and the door is opened. Noah exits the ark. And in verse 17 of chapter 8, we read, "Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by families from the ark. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. So we notice that the ark came to rest on the mountain, Mount Ararat. And Noah builds an altar of stone to lift up the sacrifice of the animals for God. Okay, so he builds this altar out of stone. He puts the animals on the altar as a sacrifice for God. An altar out of stone is a declaration of dependence on God. Then before that we read from chapter 11 of the Tower of Babel. Now, the whole earth is speaking one language. Just imagine what we could do if everyone spoke the same language. We're working on it, actually. I mean, English is being taught all over the world. You can learn a foreign language on your phone. My parents started out actually learning Spanish on an app on their phone called Duolingo, and now they're starting their second quarter of Spanish, and they're actually getting pretty good. So you can learn a language, but at this point, the whole earth spoke one language. And if we continue to read this Genesis 14, we find that they settled on the plain of Shinar, I believe. This is a lower point. You know, the ark rested on the high point, and these people decided to build a tower at the low point on the plain. When they start to build the city, where they start to build a tower, they don't use stone that's already there. They make their own stone. And, you know, we build buildings out of bricks that we make. We have brick on our platform here and throughout, outside our building. But I'm looking at this story of the Tower of Babel as a illustration of an altar. Okay, so this tower, for the sake of this sermon and for the sake of making some comparisons here, let's think of the tower as an altar. Okay, and these people are building this tower up to the heavens to make a name for themselves. And so they take this material and they make bricks and they heat them up and then they start to stack them. And the pictures that we've seen of drawings, or they're not photographs, of course, but they're drawings of the Tower of Babel show like a ramp going up around the outside. So if that's the case, they're taking these bricks that they've made, they've heated up, and they're taking them around and stacking these bricks all over. And I'm wondering, the fact that everyone is getting together, unified under one mission, and that mission is to make their name great, their own name great, is concerning. And God calls this out, and he comes down, and he mixes up the language. The purpose of the Tower of Babel was to build themselves a city and a tower, crying out their independence and their own greatness. Let us make a name for ourselves, us first. Now, we'll skip forward a little ways to 1 Kings chapter 18, 32 to 35. I'm going to read through this. It's just a couple of verses. This is the passage about Elijah on the top of Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal. So 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 32 to 35. Yes, 32 to 35. And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. This is the right way to do it. He built an altar in the name of the Lord. And he made a trench about the altar, as great as would contain 2 seahs of seed. And he put the wood in order and cut the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, "Fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood." And he said, "Do it a second time." And he said, "Do it a third time." The reason they were building these altars was because the land was experiencing a drought. Like they were not receiving water. They were not able to grow their crops. They were not able to water their livestock, drink water for themselves. This water affects so much, and when we're experiencing a drought, it affects everything. And so they got together on top of the mountain to call out to their gods and send water. Whichever god sent water, whichever god responded with water, was the one that they would serve. Would respond with fire and then subsequently with water. Okay. So they were asked to summon their gods on top of Mount Carmel. The reason for all of this was to appease them and hopefully result in a restoration of rainfall. Elijah poured water over all the altar, not once or twice or three, 4 times he poured water over the altar. Now, it's interesting that the blessing being asked for is also what is being put on the altar. He's not saying, I have all this extra grain, let me put it here, and then we can get some water, because we don't have much water. They had to go through a pretty extreme process to get that much water up there. They had to go a long ways to bring it there, and then to dump it on the altar. Oh my goodness, you could have done so much with that water. We could have watered our plants, and we could have had fresh produce, but instead you put it on the rocks? Are you kidding me? So Elijah builds an altar, and he covers it with water, which he's asking for water. Noah built an altar after leaving the ark. On the altar, he sacrificed animals that had just been saved from the flood. What? We were supposed to eat those. What? Okay. So God had chosen to protect Noah and his family, along with other forms of life, from the earth. Yet it appears not long after the flood, there was a hunger in the people to make their name great again and be known across the land. They could do it themselves. And so the Tower of Babel begins to be built. They can do it themselves. How many times have we said to ourselves, I can do this all by myself? When we're kids, we're praised for it. We're praised, oh, wow, you built that all by yourself. Way to go. Or, oh, you got stuck up in that tree all by yourself. Well, you can find a way down, I'm sure, all by yourself. Right? Am I crazy to think that anybody has said that before? You've got yourself into this mess, you can get yourself out all by yourself. Been there, done that. And the fact that we serve and we follow and we worship a triune God, a God of 3 in 1, tells me that if we're made in the image of God, and God is 3 in 1, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, we are made for community. We are made for dependence on other people. And yet, the Tower of Babel was built by these people to make a name for themselves. Abraham built an altar to sacrifice his son Isaac. He had been promised by God to be the father of a great nation. Yet now God was asking Abraham to sacrifice his son. Greatness isn't only in what God gives us, but more so God himself and his promise of steadfast presence. We worry about making ourselves great. We declare our own independence, just as the builders of the Tower of Babel, making a name for ourselves. Yet we hold so tightly to the same sacrifices he asks us to place on the altar: our jobs, our titles, positions of influence, our families, our money, the things we fear losing. We grasp for control in our lives, and what we begin to hold more tightly to are the things we've begun to value even greater than the giver. The formation of an altar is a declaration of dependence on God. The act of sacrificing on an altar completes that declaration. God's will is to bless us further than we experience now, yet many of us fear losing what we have. And many of us fear losing what we love. What is God leading you to put on your altar?